poor widow had no one left to bury her child, until a silent gunslinger dug the grave beside her. The wind carried dust over the Kansas plains, rustling dry grass like the whisper of ghosts. At the edge of the hills just beyond town, Clara Belle Whitmore stood alone, her hands red and raw, gripping a rusted shovel. The grave she dug was shallow so far, and the soil resisted her every thrust. It had not rained in months. Beside her lay a small bundle wrapped in a faded quilt, her son Samuel, taken by the fever that swept through the settlement. No one had come to help, no neighbor, no friend. The church door had stayed closed. The doctor had long fled. And Clara, once the preacher's wife, now stood beneath a sky that held no answers. Behind her, at a distance, the townsfolk gathered near the trail, not to offer aid but to whisper. She walks with ghosts now. Lost her husband to a bullet, her boy to the plague. That kind of grief turns a woman. She still keeps the church lamp lit. For who? Her dead? Some believed she had brought the sickness. Others swore they saw her speaking to the wind. A few said she never cried, not after her husband Daniel was shot in the crossfire of 2 gangs 7 months before, not after Samuel's fever boiled him quiet in her arms. That kind of silence frightened people more than screaming ever could. Clara's tears had dried days ago. Now only the ache remained. With every swing of the shovel she carved a place in the earth not just for her child, but for everything she once believed in. A rider approached slow. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw him, steady, unhurried. He dismounted 20 paces away. His clothes were dusty, his face sun-worn, expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his brimmed hat. A revolver hung low on his hip. Clara straightened, her eyes narrowed in the red haze of the evening. The man said nothing. He looked at the grave, then at the quilt-wrapped child. Then he looked at her. Without a word, he stepped forward and took the shovel from her trembling hands. He began to dig. Clara did not move. She watched, breath held, unsure if this was mercy or madness. But she did not stop him. She sank to her knees beside the bundle, laying a hand gently atop the cloth. The man, Levi Gray, dug with steady rhythm, his shoulders flexing with each movement, his boots set firm in the earth. He never looked at her, never asked her name. The only sound was the scrape of metal against stone, and the mournful cry of distant wind. When the grave was done, he knelt beside her. Together they lowered Samuel into the earth. As dusk deepened to night, Levi reached into his coat and withdrew a small wooden cross. He planted it at the head of the grave, then, for the first time, spoke, his voice rough, low, like dry thunder. "You once saved me. Let me carry this grief for you." Clara stared at him, her lips parted but silent. And then, slowly, she bowed her head. The ground beneath her knees was hard, but for the first time in days she felt something ease in her chest. The hill they named for grief had taken everything from her, but tonight it gave her something back. Not salvation, not forgiveness, but presence. A hand that helped, a voice that did not judge. And in this, maybe, a beginning. The morning light crept slow over the ridge, softening the harsh lines of the land. Where shadows once draped the lonely grave, sunlight now settled like a blessing, fragile, fleeting. Elias Gray stood still, the cold wood of his knife biting against his palm, as he carved into the weathered branch he had found just past the ridge. Each cut was careful, not practiced, but deliberate. The cross took shape slowly, a rough thing made from dry mesquite, tied with leather cord at the center. He knelt by the grave and planted it at the head, pressing it deep into the earth like it might anchor something greater than wood. Then he whispered, "Samuel." The name hung in the air, simple and small, like a note from a broken hymn. Clara, standing behind him with her arms folded over her stomach, froze. It was the first time anyone had said her son's name aloud since he died. Not the doctor, not the preacher, not even her neighbors. Elias stood and stepped back. His gaze did not ask for thanks. He did not expect any. He just nodded once at the grave, then turned away, as if the moment had already passed. But the silence did not last. Voices rose from below. Clara turned, eyes narrowing. Down the slope, near the old wagon trail, a dozen townsfolk approached, faces drawn tight, hands clenched around pitchforks and rusted pistols. They stopped a stone's throw away, boots grinding the dust. Clara Belle, called a man in a preacher's coat, Reverend Elkins, self-appointed after her husband's death. "This hill's not yours to haunt, nor is this land a resting place for unnatural things." "She brought it on herself," someone else muttered. "Fever's a curse. Her husband took bullets meant for sinners." Now their ghosts won't leave. She lit the church lamp last night, another woman hissed. That chapel's been cold 7 months. Ain't right. Clara said nothing. She stood straight, a figure carved of grief and will. She won't leave, Elkins said. Then we make her. Several took a step forward. Elias moved before Clara did. He stepped between her and the mob, his long coat swaying, the morning light catching the silver of his revolver's grip. His hand did not rest fully on the gun, just near enough. He looked at them all. Not with rage. Not with threat. With clarity. Like he had seen worse. Like he had buried worse. She buried more than any of you ever dared to love, Elias said, voice low but carrying. Step back or draw. No one moved. Wind cut between them. The same dry wind that had whistled through bones and old canyons, that had filled empty boots in towns no longer marked on maps. Elkins swallowed, eyes flicking to Elias's belt, then to Clara, who hadn't blinked. This isn't your fight, mister, he said. Elias took one step forward. Then make it yours. The preacher faltered. One by one, the others backed away. Fear did what reason never could. They had heard stories. About a man who once shot 3 men through a window without standing. About a gun that never missed when drawn in silence. The mob dissolved, slow and bitter. They left dust and looks behind. When the last bootstep faded, Elias turned to Clara. She still hadn't spoken. But something shifted in her, barely seen. Her shoulders fell, not from defeat but from weight lifted. She knelt by the grave, placed her hand over the mound, and closed her eyes. Elias stood watch a little longer. And then he sat beside her, where words were not needed. Where the cross he carved said enough. Before the year had stripped Clara Belle Whitmore down to bone and silence, she had been the heart of a place once filled with song. She and Daniel had come to the edge of nowhere, what the maps called Echo Bend, and what the locals knew as Dust, and built a chapel out of cedar planks and courage. The bell tower never rang loud, but it called to the right ones, children with scraped knees, wives who needed more than whiskey prayers, and men who had not yet forgotten what mercy felt like. They taught letters. They mended broken fence rails. Daniel led Sunday hymns, and Clara mixed herbs for fevers and wounds. She had a gift, folks whispered back then, not with visions or spirits, but with a gentleness that made people want to try again. Samuel had been born beneath that roof, wailing loud and perfect into his father's hands. His laughter once filled the rafters. Clara had believed back then that they had outrun the cruelty of the world. But then came the spring market day. The town square had been noisy, filled with cattle auctions and fly-slick pies. Daniel had gone into the crowd to break up an argument, 2 ranch hands shouting over the cost of a sick horse. The tension had sparked fast, like dry grass to flame. Guns were drawn. Clara had screamed his name, but the bullet was faster. It hit his back just as he turned toward her, confusion in his eyes. He crumpled in the dust, arms out like he was catching something that never came. Clara reached him seconds too late, blood soaking the front of her dress, as she rocked him in her lap, her screams swallowed by the gawking crowd. The town buried Daniel quick. No preacher to speak for the preacher. No hymns, no words. Just a wooden box and too much silence. 7 months later, Samuel fell to the fever. No medicine helped. The air turned to fire in his lungs, his small body shaking. Clara held him through every hour, whispering prayers she no longer believed in, until he stilled. Until the room went so quiet she could hear the wind whisper through the cracks in the walls. No one came to offer a prayer. No one brought a single candle. Now, in the ruins of what had once been their chapel, Clara stacked the stones of a makeshift altar. Her hands shook with colder memory. She no longer knew which. The pews were gone. The roof was charred timber, but she lit a candle anyway. Let the flame remember what others forgot. Let it flicker in defiance of the emptiness that had become her church. Outside, Elias Gray had set his tent against the windbreak, just far enough to give her space, just close enough to keep watch. He fixed the chapel's side wall during the day and kept the fire stoked at night. He never said why. He never said much at all, but his presence was a weight that steadied instead of suffocating. One evening, Clara left a bowl of soup on the saddle rail near his tent. Just a simple thing, broth, onion, a scrap of rabbit meat. It was all she had to offer. She did not wait. She did not look back. Later, a knock came at her door. Not loud. Just 3 short raps like someone testing if a ghost could answer. When she opened it, Elias stood there, the empty bowl in one hand, the spoon in the other. In his palm he held a smooth black stone, round and cold, the kind riverbeds keep hidden for centuries. He set the spoon in the bowl, then offered the stone. "Debt's not paid with soup," he said, voice low, rough like gravel warmed in the sun. "But this is a start." Clara stared at the stone. In the old ways it meant a bond of honor, a vow, something earned and not taken, something that did not demand but quietly promised. She took it. Her fingers closed around the cool surface. She did not smile, but she nodded. And for Elias, that was enough. The wind carried the scent of smoke before Clara ever saw the flames. She had been in the shed grinding yarrow roots into powder when the wind shifted. Her heart dropped. She flung open the door and sprinted through the brittle grass toward the edge of the garden, Daniel's garden, reborn after so much death. Orange licked the air like a curse. Fire leapt from bush to bush, hungry wild. Children's laughter rang through the heat, high, cruel. "Witch widow, witch widow," they chanted from behind the fence, throwing pebbles and clumps of dry dirt. Clara froze. The herbs she had nurtured for months, roots Daniel once taught her to grow for fever, burns, grief, were crackling under the fire's dance. Her hands shook, not from fear, from fury too sharp to name. A second bottle flew, this one glass, stuffed with a burning rag. It hit the fence and burst in a shriek of sparks. And then, like thunder rolled in on horseback, Elias Gray was there. He rode in from the west, where the shadows still clung to the ridge, dismounted before the dust settled, and stalked through the flames like a ghost the fire couldn't touch. His revolver gleamed in the sun, low and loose in his grip. One of the older boys, a teenager with smoke-stained fingers, raised another bottle. "Don't," Elias said. The boy smirked. "Ain't your business." The cork lit. Elias fired. The bottle dropped. So did the boy, clutching his hand, the smoking rag still flickering on the ground beside him. No one else moved. Elias stood between Clara and the mob. His voice was like gravel, slow and final. "You burn her garden, you'll be buried in it." Silence fell. Even the fire seemed to retreat. The townsfolk, now pale and blinking, backed away, one by one, muttering, glaring. But they left. Clara did not speak. Her gaze remained on the scorched remnants of the basil, the blackened mint stalks, the crushed lavender. She knelt, pressed her hand into the earth, as if asking the roots if they still remembered her. Elias didn't say a word. That night, under the dim lamplight in the chapel ruins, Sheriff Brandt came. His boots thudded on the wooden planks, and his badge caught the light like a warning. "You're a ghost from the wrong stories, Gray," the sheriff said. "We've had peace since you disappeared. I don't want your kind of justice stirring this place up." Elias was silent, carving at a block of wood with his hunting knife. Brandt stepped closer. "Leave by sundown tomorrow, or you'll answer to the badge." Then Clara's voice cut through the dim chapel like a bell ringing for truth. "If he leaves," she said, stepping out from the shadows, "you'll answer to the God you claim to serve." Brandt stared, not because of the threat, but because Clara Whitmore, widow, witch, outcast, had finally raised her voice again. And for the first time in months, the town heard it, and wondered what else she had left to say. The first drop fell on the edge of Clara's porch, a quiet tap against the wood that made her pause mid-step. She looked up. Another drop followed, then another. By the time she stepped into the yard, rain was pouring over Red Hollow for the first time in 300 days. It did not come gentle. It came wild, washing away dust, turning hard-packed roads to rivers, slapping against windows like a long-forgotten promise. The parched ground drank greedily. Roofs groaned beneath it. People stepped outside in silence, blinking up at the sky like it was a miracle they had forgotten how to pray for. Clara stood barefoot in the garden, letting the water soak her dress, her hair, her skin. The burn patches still bore the scars of fire, but somewhere beneath the ash the roots had waited. She could feel it. She knelt, pressed her fingers into the mud, and smiled. Elias brought out the cedar stakes they had carved in the evenings. Together they rebuilt the rows. One by one, children began to appear at the fence again, not to throw stones, to watch. A boy with a scabbed knee, a girl with a cough. They hovered, uncertain, until Elias nodded once. Then they slipped through the gate and helped water the seeds. The mothers came next, hesitant, eyes darting. One brought a tin cup and asked if Clara still made willow bark tonic for pain. Another whispered about her sister's swollen joints. Clara said nothing, just handed them what they needed. Word spread. The woman who once spat at Clara in the market now left eggs on her porch. No one mentioned the gallows anymore. Then came the fever. A child, maybe 6 years old, burning up beneath patchwork quilts. Her mother, Rebecca Miles, burst through the garden gate just after sunset, soaking wet, clutching the limp girl in her arms. "Please," she gasped, "they said you knew. They said you could help." Clara led her inside without a word, laid the child on her bed. Her fingers moved with practiced calm, pulling leaves from a jar marked Holy Root, grinding them fine, mixing with water from the rain barrel. Elias kept the fire going all night, bringing fresh cloths, cooling the girl's skin. He never asked what she needed. He just stayed. Near dawn, the child's breathing eased. She opened her eyes, blinked. Rebecca fell to her knees beside Clara. "I cursed you once," she whispered, voice cracked and shaking. "Said you were why my crops failed. Said your husband's ghost made my baby sick. I believed the worst of you. And you. You saved what's left of me." She buried her face against Clara's skirts, weeping. Clara touched her shoulder gently, said nothing. Outside, the garden drank. Elias stood at the doorway, watching the gray light spread across the soaked fields. "You think they'll remember this next drought?" he asked softly. Clara stepped beside him. Rain dripped from her hair. She nodded once. Not because she believed it, but because sometimes hope needed someone to hold it up, even if only for a little while. And today, that someone was her. Night came soft over the rebuilt garden, the kind of dusk that did not press but whispered its way across the land. The last of the children had gone, their laughter fading down the path, and Clara sat on the steps with the Bible in her lap, its leather scorched and its spine cracked, but still whole. The fire crackled low behind her. Inside the house, Elias moved quietly, setting a kettle over the flames, the motion steady, almost reverent. He had not spoken much that day. Clara did not need him to. She had learned to feel the shift in his silences, the way they were no longer a wall, but a kind of waiting. Now he came to the doorway and leaned against the frame. The shadows curled around him like smoke, but his eyes were steady in the firelight. "I knew your husband," he said quietly. Clara looked up. "He saved my life once. I doubt he ever told you." He stepped out, sat beside her, the porch boards creaking under his weight. "It was 6 years ago. Winter. I was bleeding bad. Took a bullet near Wichita. Wrong place, wrong deal. I crawled into the woods thinking I'd die there. No prayers, no name left to curse. Just blood and trees." Clara listened, still as a stone. But then this man comes walking. Lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. Finds me in the snow, half out of my head. He didn't ask who I was or what I'd done. Just wrapped me in his coat and dragged me back to his shack. Sat by the stove all night, reciting scripture like it might keep us both warm. He gave a half smile, grim and distant. I asked him once, "Why'd you save me?" "I've done things no preacher ought to forgive." He said, "God does not tally by blood, he tallies by what you do after." Clara bowed her head. Her hands tightened around the Bible, the pages warped from flame and rain and time. Elias reached into his coat, pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He handed it to her gently. "I found this again a week ago. Thought it was lost." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small wooden cross, worn smooth from years of touch. On the back, Daniel's initials carved deep and clean. "This book kept him breathing," Elias said. "Maybe it'll do the same for us." Clara cradled the cross against her chest. Her lips trembled, but she did not look away. Elias turned his gaze to the dark horizon. "I never prayed before," he said after a long silence. "Not proper, not with words. Not even in that shack." He took a breath that shook, just once. "But I think I've been praying since I met you." The words fell quiet, but they echoed through the porch, through her heart. Clara's hands came up to her mouth, covering a sob. Her shoulders trembled, and then the tears came. But this time they were not the kind that burned. They were soft. Grief, yes, but something gentler too. The first mercy she had felt in a long, long while. Elias didn't reach for her, didn't press. He simply sat, his presence solid beside her, his words still warm in the space between them. When she leaned against him, he shifted to hold her. No more than that. And it was enough. Inside, the fire dimmed to coals. Outside, the stars blinked into place. And on that weathered porch in a broken part of the world, two people who had once believed themselves too ruined to be seen now sat side by side, held not by salvation, but by something even quieter. Faith. The morning broke with wind, low and restless, the kind that rattled shutters and scattered dust through the seams of the plains. Clara stood at the edge of her herb garden, the leaves dancing beneath her fingertips, but her mind was elsewhere. Something in the air had shifted, subtle but certain. It was the kind of change the earth feels before a storm, the kind a widow senses before her knees remember grief. Inside, Elias sat at the table, sharpening a blade he had not touched in months. Not out of necessity, but out of memory. His movements were slow, deliberate, the scrape of steel against stone steady as breath. The knife had once belonged to a man he did not speak of, and the hands that held it now were steadier than they had been then. But his eyes, they did not leave the horizon. The sky turned to brass by noon, and the wind died as if holding its breath. Then came the rider. A lone figure atop a dun-colored horse, slow-moving, but deliberate. His coat hung scorched at the hem, dust-coated and weathered by roads too long and mercy too rare. A scar ran from his ear to his jaw, pink and puckered like it had tried to kill him once but failed. He stopped at the gate without tying off his reins. Clara stepped out first, drying her hands on her apron, heart steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. Elias had not spoken all morning, but she felt him behind her like a shadow. The man's voice came out like gravel cracking beneath boots. "I'm looking for Elias Gray." Clara did not blink. "He's here." From the cabin door, Elias emerged. No guns, no coat. Just a man in a shirt rolled to the elbows, sun-touched and tired, his jaw unshaven and his stance calm, but not soft. The rider spat in the dust. "Thought you died in Elkhorn. Guess I'm not that lucky." Clara glanced at Elias, then back to the stranger. The air was a wire stretched thin between them. The man pointed with 2 fingers, his knuckles scarred. "You remember Redding? You remember what you left behind?" Elias didn't move. "I remember. He was my brother," the man said, each word laced with old blood. "And you left him bleeding in the dust for silver you never spent." Elias nodded once, slow. "And I've carried him every damn day since." The rider's jaw tensed. His hand hovered near the butt of his revolver. Clara stepped between them before he could finish the motion. Her apron still smelled of mint and firewood. "You'll kill him over his past," she said, her voice low but rooted deep. "But I've seen what he's become. I've seen what he's built, what he's protected." The man shifted, his boots grinding gravel. "I buried a child here," Clara continued, her eyes locked to his. "I buried a husband. And still I found space to forgive. Can you say the same?" The silence that followed cracked wider than any bullet. The stranger looked again at Elias, really looked. Past the scar, past the name. And what he saw, maybe, was not a gunslinger. Not anymore. Just a man who had laid down his weapons but not his ghosts. A man whose hands were still calloused, but from planting, not killing. The rider eased his reins. "Funny thing," he said, voice rasping softer. "Thought you'd be a ghost by now. Maybe you are." He turned, rode slow. The dust curled behind him like a sigh. Clara stood still until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then she turned to Elias. His face had not changed. But his eyes held something quiet and weightless. Not relief, not fear. Release. That night, by the fire, Clara brought out the knife he had sharpened that morning and laid it gently on the table between them. "You did not draw," she said. "I did not have to," Elias replied. He took her hand in his, rough and sure, and pressed it against his chest, above the scar that had never healed right. "Because the only thing that used to scare me is the only thing that makes me feel alive now." Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. Neither of them smiled. Neither needed to. And in the hush that followed, they did not speak of the past again, because the past had already watched them survive it. The rain did not come with thunder or grand arrival. It came soft, like a prayer finally answered. It soaked the hills of Kansas, turning the hard-packed earth to velvet. For the first time in nearly a year, the dust stayed down. The air smelled of sage and clean stone, and the sky, once cruel with light, had softened to something merciful. Clara stood beneath the eaves of the small cabin, sleeves rolled and boots sunk into the mud, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of chamomile. Beside her, Elias leaned silently against the doorframe, watching the land drink deep. His hat was pushed back slightly, letting the rain hit his face. They said the drought would last forever, that no good would grow from the ground where she had wept and bled, that the land was cursed, that she was cursed. But that morning on the hill they once named for grief, something bloomed. Tiny yellow flowers, wild mustard maybe, or desert marigold, rose from the soil above Samuel's grave. The petals trembled in the rain, bright as firelight, unafraid of the wind. Clara stepped out without her shawl and knelt in the wet grass. Her fingers brushed the bloom, careful, reverent. She did not cry, but her lips moved. Not words, a breath, a name. Behind her, Elias placed a new wooden cross into the earth, better carved than the first, still simple, but steady. Beneath it, a circle of small stones, laid with care and quiet precision, his offering not to the dead but to the woman who had kept him from becoming one of them. That week, they reopened Daniel's garden. The herbs Clara had fought to save, the ones scorched by fire and revived by rain, stood tall again. Lavender, echinacea, boneset, mint, feverfew, the kind of green that only comes from surviving something brutal. Children wandered in shyly, holding scraped knees and shallow coughs. Mothers followed, heads bowed, not in shame, but in thanks. Their voices were soft, their eyes were wet, but no one turned away this time. She did not say, "I forgive you." She did not have to. They saw it in the way she reached for their hands, the way Elias nodded when they passed through the gate, the way the door stayed open even after dark. Together, Clara and Elias built something more than shelter, more than memory. They built a place for healing. A wooden sign hung by the garden path, Whitmore Gray, Remedies and Rest. It was not a clinic, not a chapel, but folks came just the same, some for salves, some for tea, some only to sit by the garden and listen to the bees. Others just wanted to be somewhere where pain had turned into something beautiful. And sometimes, when the sky turned the color of bruised apricot, Clara would sit with Elias on the porch, their chairs creaking in rhythm with the wind, and they would say nothing at all, because some things did not need to be spoken. They never married, never wore rings or took vows. They had no need for town blessings or church bells. But Elias built her a new door with her name carved above it. He did not ask. He simply did it. And Clara planted a tree near his forge, an elm that would outlive them both, its roots drinking from the same land that once tried to bury her. They had no children of their own, but half the town came to call their place a kind of home, a haven, a second chance. People brought bread and gossip and stories. They left quieter, steadier, carrying seeds of something good. And when the second spring came, more flowers rose on the hill, not just over Samuel's grave, but all along the slope, as if the land remembered who had knelt there in rain and sorrow and given something back. She buried her world in the dust, the sheriff once said, standing at the garden's edge, hat in hand. Elias, sanding a saddle nearby, had glanced toward Clara in the sunlight. His voice was even like always. "She buried her world," he said, "but I gave her roots again." Clara turned, caught the last line, and smiled, because between them, devotion grew wild. If this story stirred your heart, if the silence of a gunslinger and the resilience of a widow reminded you that even in the dust, love can take root, then ride with us a little further. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales that rise from sorrow, blaze through bullets, and bloom in the most unlikely corners of the American frontier. From forbidden glances to second chances, every story is crafted to move your soul and leave a trail in your memory. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more cinematic journeys through heartache, healing, and love that defies time and tragedy. Turn on the bell so you never miss a ride through passion, grit, and the echoes of devotion. Because out here, where the land is wild and hearts even wilder, love always finds a way.